This story follows Imani Rhodes, a young black girl who exposes a powerful betrayal inside a prestigious boarding school, where her closest friend, a neurodivergent boy, is being silenced. Her act of truth-telling sets off a reckoning that shakes the institution's legacy and forces a once-blind headmaster to confront what real leadership means and who truly deserves to carry it forward. Imani Rhodes wasn't supposed to be at Everdale Academy. Not really. She was the scholarship kid the diversity edition whispered about in hallways and parent fundraisers. She wasn't from any of the prep schools that funneled into Everdale's pristine courtyards. Her backpack was secondhand, her shoes always a little scuffed, and her lunchbox didn't have an imported sticker from Florence or Tokyo. But what she lacked in pedigree, she made up for in observation. Imani noticed things, like how the art teacher's smile always dropped when Nolan Greystone walked in, or how the janitor whistled louder when something bad had happened, or, most importantly, how Leo vanished. It wasn't loud or dramatic. One Monday morning, his seat in biology was empty, the kind of absence that would normally earn nothing more than a footnote in a teacher's attendance app. But by lunch, Imani knew something was wrong. Leo never missed school. Not because he loved it, but because he needed it, its routine, its schedule, the safety of predictable bell tones, and laminated task charts. He wasn't in the courtyard, not on the sensory swing near the back garden, not in the library where he liked to arrange the books by color. She checked everywhere except the one place that made her skin itch: the infirmary. Students didn't go there unless something was broken. Not a cough, not a headache. Everdale kids had private physicians for that. But Leo, he didn't fit Everdale's mold. And Everdale didn't like being reminded of that. Imani approached the side entrance and tapped lightly on the frosted glass. A nurse opened the door just enough to peer out. "Miss Rhodes, do you need something?" "I'm looking for Leo Singh." The nurse's smile didn't reach her eyes. "He's not available right now." "Is he sick? Just resting?" Imani tilted her head, resting from what the door shut in her face. She stood there for a moment, fists clenched the air, still holding the faint scent of antiseptic and lemon polish. Her gut twisted, not with fear, but certainty. Something had happened. Something wrong. That evening, long after the other students were safely tucked away in their dorms, Imani slipped out in borrowed slippers and crept down to the old maintenance hallway, where Mr. Keene, the school's aging IT technician, often took his midnight tea. He was one of the few staff members who spoke to her like an equal. Perhaps it was because his knees crackled like hers when climbing stairs, or because he didn't care about last names. "Imani," he said without surprise as she appeared beside his office door. "You look like someone carrying a truth no one wants to hear." She blinked. "Leo's gone." Keene stirred his tea slowly. "Not gone. Just pushed aside." "What do you mean?" "I mean the system's wheels turned and he got caught in the gears." Imani stared at him, a hollow chill crawling up her arms. "Do you know where he is?" Keene tapped his mug. "He's still on the grounds, but locked in. Quietly." "Why?" He hesitated. "Because someone wanted him silent. There's video." She leaned forward. "Can I see it?" He looked at her. Really looked, then nodded once. A few keystrokes later, the screen lit up with muted footage from one of the northern stairwell cameras. Grainy, tilted, but unmistakable. Nolan Greystone, the headmaster's son, stood with arms crossed, while two aides flanked Leo. Leo was rocking slightly, holding his laminated schedule card in front of him like a shield. Nolan snatched it, tore it, then leaned in to whisper something. Imani couldn't hear the words, but Leo's expression crumpled. The aides took him by the arms. Leo resisted. Nolan stepped back, smiled, and turned away. "Date stamped 2 nights ago," Keene said quietly. "After hours. Not a single medical note on file since." Imani's jaw tightened. They made him disappear. Keene turned to her. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Imani didn't answer. Not right away. She walked back to her dorm, heart pounding in her throat, fists clenched so tight her nails left crescent moons in her palms. She thought of Leo's drawings. The way he'd once handed her a sketch of two trees, with faces holding hands, his way of saying thank you, after she helped him through a noisy cafeteria day. She thought of the last time she saw him smile. It had been a real smile, one that didn't require translation. And then she thought of Nolan's smile. Sharp, empty, practiced. By the time Imani climbed into bed, the decision was already made. She wasn't going to disappear. She wasn't going to whisper. She was going to yell. She was going to yell. But not yet, not without being smart about it. Imani knew better than to scream into the void without armor. This wasn't the kind of place where truth got applause. Everdale Academy polished its corridors and silenced its controversies. If she came forward too soon, too loud, too alone, she'd be buried in clarifications and contextual explanations before anyone heard her. She needed proof. Real, undeniable public proof. The next morning, the campus felt colder, not in temperature, but in presence. Even the sunlight seemed filtered through suspicion. She passed Nolan in the hallway between second and third period. He didn't look at her, but his smirk pulsed like a challenge. At lunch, Imani sat alone, her food untouched. Her thoughts were spinning too fast. She couldn't focus on the noise in the cafeteria, or the way students threw glances at her table like they didn't know whether to avoid her or interrogate her. She was invisible again, but this time, it worked in her favor. After class, she made her way to the server room. Mr. Keene was waiting. He didn't say anything, just handed her a small gray USB stick, its metal scratched and faded. "This is a direct export of the footage," he said. "Copies on a backup drive, but this one's yours. You'll need it. Will they fire you?" He shrugged. "Maybe. But I've worked here long enough to know when the walls need shaking. They'll call it misconduct. I'll call it finally doing my job." Imani clutched the USB like it was made of glass and gunpowder. "Thank you. Just be careful," he added. "Greystone doesn't play fair. Not the father, and certainly not the son." Imani didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling paint, rehearsing in her mind how to present the footage. Emails could be intercepted, messages deleted. Confrontation wouldn't work. She had no power, no allies. She needed a place that couldn't be easily erased. Everdale had a closed network for student media. It was where the weekly newsletter was posted, alongside podcasts, student-made films and speeches from visiting alumni. There was a backdoor login, a loophole Keene had shown her, once buried under a string of forgotten pages. It wasn't meant for uploading sensitive content, but if she masked the video's source well enough, it would go live for everyone with a school login. The next morning, she skipped breakfast. She locked herself in a tech lab under the pretense of working on her robotics project, and got to work. She trimmed the video, added subtitles for clarity, and blurred out Leo's face, not out of fear, but out of respect. She added no commentary, no music. Just raw, quiet footage with a title card for those who pretend not to see. Then, she hit upload. By mid-morning, the whispers began. By lunch, the storm had arrived. She walked into the dining hall, and every conversation paused as if someone had pressed mute on the entire room. Heads turned, eyes locked onto her. She kept walking head high until a girl she didn't even know whispered, "Was that you?" Imani didn't answer. She didn't need to. Across the campus in the administrative wing, Headmaster Walter Greystone sat frozen in front of his office monitor. The video played again and again, his son's face calm and cruel. Leo's distress, the silence of the adults who stood by. The door opened behind him. It was Nolan. "They're saying it's fake," Nolan said, dropping into a chair without waiting. "Deepfake stuff. You know how people are." Walter said nothing. He'd seen deepfakes. He'd seen bad edits. This wasn't one of them. "She'll be disciplined, right?" Nolan added. "For violating network policy, spreading rumors, defamation." Walter finally looked at his son. There was no remorse in Nolan's face. Just irritation, like this was a mess someone else should clean up. "I need to verify the footage," Walter said slowly. "What's there to verify?" Nolan laughed hollow and humorless. It's a setup. Probably Mr. Keen's doing. Walter leaned back in his chair. For the first time in years, he saw not the boy he had mentored and molded, but something else. Something darker. Nolan had always been driven, smart, articulate, ambitious. But this was more. This was deliberate. Across campus, Imani waited. She had expected backlash, but she didn't expect silence. The administration didn't call her in. Teachers didn't mention it. Even Keen didn't respond to her messages. It was as if the school had decided to ignore the explosion and hope the smoke would fade. But by the next day, the media got involved. An anonymous parent had forwarded the video to a local education blogger. Within hours, the post was shared across forums, teacher groups, and eventually made it onto national sites. Everdale couldn't keep it quiet anymore. That night, someone slipped an envelope under Imani's door. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, typed unsigned. "Watch your step. Not everyone wants the truth out." She read it 3 times. Then she folded it neatly, slid it into her math textbook, and whispered to herself, "Good." Because if they were warning her, it meant they were scared. They were scared. That was the part that mattered. Not the threats, not the silence, not the envelope slid under her door like a warning shot. The fear meant they no longer controlled the story. For the first time, Everdale Academy, the place that prided itself on polished silence, was on the defensive. And Imani Rhodes, the girl they tried to ignore, had become a name they couldn't unhear. But fear doesn't go unanswered. The following morning, the school announced a temporary restriction on digital access. The student media network was under maintenance. Several posts were pulled, including the video. No emails were sent. No acknowledgments made. The only thing that changed was the quiet scramble beneath the surface. Then came the summons. It wasn't Headmaster Greystone who called her in. It was Assistant Dean Marianne Elwood, the school's enforcer disguised as a guidance counselor. Her office was painted soft yellows, filled with plush chairs and books on adolescent empowerment. Imani had only been in there once before, when she first arrived on scholarship, and was told to let the experience transform her. Now she returned under very different circumstances. Imani, Elwood said gently, gesturing to a seat. "Let's talk." Imani sat spine straight. "I know things must feel overwhelming. So much noise. So much pressure. You've become quite the center of attention." "I didn't ask to be," Imani replied. "No, but actions have consequences, and we want to make sure you're supported, that you feel safe, and that you understand the damage misinformation can cause." Imani narrowed her eyes. "It wasn't misinformation." "We're not saying it was or wasn't," Elwood said smoothly. "But there are processes for grievances, channels. You should have come to us privately." "I did," Imani said. "When I asked where Leo was, you shut the door in my face." There was a pause. Elwood smiled thinly. "I understand you're close with Mr. Keen." Imani didn't respond. "Well," Elwood continued, "he's been placed on administrative leave pending investigation into network breaches. You understand, of course. Cybersecurity is a serious matter." Imani clenched her jaw. "He did the right thing. That's not your decision to make." Imani stood. Neither is pretending nothing happened. As she left the office, she passed Nolan in the hall. He leaned casually against the locker's, arms crossed, as if this was all just a game he had already won. "You know they're not going to listen to you," he said. Imani kept walking. "Even if they do," he called after her, "no one cares for long. Stories die. People move on." She stopped and turned slowly. "Maybe," she said, "but not before they remember who tried to bury the truth." By that evening, her dorm door was locked from the outside for security reasons. She wasn't technically suspended, but she wasn't allowed to leave unescorted. A staff monitor was assigned to her hallway. Students were told she was being protected, but they all knew what it meant. They wanted her quiet. What they didn't know was that she had already made backup copies, 3 USBs, hidden in places even she might forget. She had sent one to a student at another school. She'd uploaded another to a cloud under a dummy email. And the third, she mailed to someone she knew Headmaster Greystone would recognize Leo's mother. 2 days later, the school was forced to hold a town hall. It was closed to outsiders, no press, no cameras, but the auditorium was full. Parents, faculty, students. Imani was seated in the back under watch, but when the murmurs began to rise, no one could keep their eyes off her. Not when Headmaster Greystone stepped onto the stage. He looked like a man undone creased shirt, tired eyes, a half-hearted grip on the microphone. This past week, he began Everdale has faced serious accusations. A video was circulated. It shows disturbing footage involving my son and another student. I've seen it. And while an internal review is underway, I want to be clear, Everdale does not condone cruelty, nor do we hide from our obligations to care for every student. There were nods, polite claps, but it wasn't enough. A voice rose from the middle row. "Where's Leo now?" Greystone hesitated. "He is receiving private support away from campus." Who decided that someone else asked? Greystone's hand tightened on the mic. More voices joined in. Questions sharpened. What about the staff who stood by? Why didn't the administration act sooner? Why was the video taken down? Imani didn't speak. She didn't need to. The room had begun to fracture, doubt creeping into places that had once been marble solid. Parents didn't trust silence anymore. Teachers who had once glanced away now looked uncomfortable. When Greystone stepped off the stage, he walked straight toward Imani. He didn't say anything at first. Then, he asked quietly, "Do you still have the original file?" She met his eyes. "Why?" "Because I need to see it again," he said. Not as a headmaster, as a father. She studied him. There was something different this time, not fear, not control, grief. Imani reached into her bag and handed him a spare copy. "You'll see what I saw," she said. That night the locks on her door were gone. No staff stood outside her hallway. But just before midnight, a new note appeared under her door. This one wasn't typed. It was scrawled in rushed handwriting, sharp and slanted. "You don't know who you're playing with." She stared at it, then crumpled it in her fist. They still thought it was a game. That was their mistake. They still thought it was a game. That was their mistake. Because games have rules. What Imani was fighting for didn't. There was no scoreboard, no referees, and certainly no trophies. Only one goal, the truth. And she wasn't playing to win. She was fighting to make sure Leo's voice, and kids like him, were never silenced again. By the next morning, the temperature inside Everdale had shifted. Not on the thermometers, but in the stares, the whispers, the sudden hush that fell when she entered a hallway. A week ago, Imani was invisible. Now, she was too visible. And not everyone liked what she revealed. That included Nolan. He hadn't spoken to her since the town hall. But that afternoon, as she walked alone through the West Garden path, the one students rarely used, he appeared from behind the hedges, like he'd been waiting. "You think this is over?" he said. Imani didn't flinch. "No, I think it's just beginning." His jaw twitched. "You're so sure of yourself. But you don't know how this place works. Everdale doesn't fall. It adapts. It absorbs." "You mean it hides," she said. "Like you." He stepped closer, voice low and smooth like oil on glass. "You think you're the hero here. But you're just a temporary scandal. Next semester, no one will remember your name." Imani stared at him, her voice quiet but unshakable. "Maybe not, but they'll remember yours." Later that day, Headmaster Greystone called an emergency faculty meeting. It was closed door, no students. But word spread quickly that he had played the full video again. This time, in front of the entire staff. No fast-forwarding, no commentary. Just raw footage, and the silence that followed. 2 teachers resigned the next morning. The director of student services, who had signed off on Leo's mental health removal, abruptly left campus citing personal reasons. Imani found herself summoned to Greystone's office. For the first time, she didn't feel like a trespasser. He stood when she entered. "I owe you a real apology," he said. She folded her arms. "You owe it to Leo." He nodded. "And I intend to give it. His mother received the footage you sent. She's withdrawn him from Everdale permanently." Imani's stomach sank. "He won't come back?" she asked. Greystone shook his head. "Not now. Maybe not ever. But this was his school. He never felt safe here," he said, pain flickering behind his eyes. "That's on me. I was too busy protecting the institution to protect my students." She didn't offer comfort. He hadn't earned that. But she didn't leave either. "What now?" she asked. "I'm stepping back," he said. "I've appointed an interim board to oversee a full review. Independent, transparent. I'll remain available, but I won't obstruct." She studied him. And Nolan Greystone hesitated. "He's being formally investigated. There's no way around it now." Imani looked at the framed photo on his desk. Nolan, at age 6, beaming on a soccer field. A different boy. Maybe. Or maybe just one who hadn't learned how to fake sincerity yet. "He won't stop," she said. "I know." Outside the office, the campus was shifting. Flyers began appearing anonymous, at first demanding accountability. A student-run petition circulated, calling for reforms in student oversight mental health policy and a complete overhaul of the grievance system. And then one night, Everdale's website was hacked. The homepage changed briefly. Not vandalized, but rewritten. It displayed the title, "The Silence You Funded." Below it, a quote from Leo's file student, "Requires structured support. Often overwhelmed in loud settings. Responds positively to consistency and kindness." Beneath the quote, one word erased. It lasted 3 minutes before the site was restored. But that was all it took. Within 24 hours, alumni began weighing in. Some expressed outrage. Others asked hard questions. A few offered donations to reform initiatives on the condition that Imani be involved. That last part stunned her. She hadn't asked for a spotlight. She wanted justice. And now, strangely, justice was demanding her voice. Greystone called again. "They want you to speak at the next board meeting," he said. "Formally. Representing student concerns." "I'm not a leader," she said. "I'm a kid who got mad." "You're both," he said. "That's why they'll listen." The night before the meeting, Imani sat in the library surrounded by books no one touched anymore. She scribbled notes in a spiral notebook, then crossed half of them out. She didn't want to sound like a press release. She wanted to sound like herself. She looked up and found Mr. Keene standing in the doorway. His eyes were tired, but kind. "I shouldn't be here," he said. "Technically, I'm still suspended." "You saw the video," she said. "That's more than most." He walked in, sat across from her. "You're not just doing this for Leo, are you?" She shook her head. "There's more like him. In every hallway." Keene smiled faintly. "Good. Because what you've started, it's louder than you know." The next day, Imani stood in the marble atrium of Everdale's old administrative building. The board sat in suits and polished shoes. Her knees trembled, but her voice didn't. "I didn't come here to be a problem," she said. "But if telling the truth makes me one, then maybe this school needs more problems." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "This is Leo's class schedule, the one he carried every day." It was torn from his hands. That moment caught on video wasn't just about cruelty. It was about erasure. "We tell students to be excellent, but only if they fit. We say we care, but only if they're easy to care for. That's not excellence. That's convenience." The room was silent. She folded the paper and looked up. "You asked me to speak. So here it is. Don't fix your image. Fix your culture." When she left the room, some board members clapped. Some didn't. But it didn't matter. Because outside, a group of students stood waiting, holding handmade signs. Some read, "We are still here." Others simply said Leo. And for the first time, Imani smiled. Not because it was over, but because it had begun. She smiled, not because it was over, but because it had begun. That afternoon, the signs were taken down by staff, but not before someone snapped a photo and posted it on a student forum. By evening, it had been shared thousands of times, along with clips of Imani's speech recorded quietly by a student 2 rows behind the board. The message spread beyond Everdale's ivy-covered walls, reaching education, advocates, disability rights organizations, and journalists who had long suspected elite institutions weren't as ethical as their brochures suggested. But inside Everdale, the aftermath wasn't glamorous. It was slow, uncomfortable, and silent in the way broken systems often are when they're not sure whether to collapse or survive. The day after her speech, Imani's teachers avoided eye contact. Some stopped calling on her in class. A few students muttered activist like it was an insult. The school posted a vague statement on its website, promising a renewed commitment to student well-being, but offered no acknowledgement of Leo or the abuse or Imani's role in bringing it to light. Still, the cracks had formed, and the institution couldn't patch them fast enough. Imani began receiving emails from students she didn't know, from alumni she had never met. Some offered thanks. Others shared stories. A few simply wrote, "I saw you. I believe you." Leo's mother sent one too. "He watched your speech," she wrote. "He didn't understand all the words, but he recognized your voice. He smiled when you said his name. Thank you." Imani stared at the message for a long time. She thought about that first day when Leo handed her a drawing of a smiling tree and called it home. A quiet thank you from a boy who struggled to speak aloud. That memory had fueled her through every insult, every warning, every cold hallway. Now, it carried her further. At the following board meeting, Headmaster Greystone announced his resignation. He didn't use the word failure, but he didn't avoid it either. "I let ambition become policy," he admitted, "and I let silence masquerade as stability." That ends today. Nolan withdrew from Everdale a week later, citing personal circumstances. His name was quietly removed from student leaderboards, school publications, and the official alumni pipeline. Some believed he had transferred. Others whispered about legal consequences. Imani didn't ask. She wasn't interested in vengeance. She wanted change. So when the board asked her to advise on a new student ethics council, she said yes, on one condition. It can't just be for appearances, she told them. It needs teeth, authority, and seats for students who don't blend in. To her surprise, they agreed. Within a month, the Everdale Student Integrity Council was formed. Imani was its youngest member. It included a student with a mobility aid, a former disciplinary case, and a girl who'd been suspended the year before for fighting back against harassment. They didn't all agree on everything, but they all knew what it meant to be unheard. Meanwhile, Leo started sending letters. Drawings mostly, sometimes of birds, sometimes of buildings with smiling windows. They always included Imani. In one, she was riding a giant pencil like a knight on a horse. In another, they sat on a swing, her holding a sunflower, him holding a book. He never wrote words, but every picture said the same thing: still here. Still with you. Imani kept them all in a folder beneath her bed. The world outside Everdale began to take notice. An education podcast invited her to speak. A foundation working with neurodivergent youth offered to fund student-led initiatives. When a university in Boston invited her to its annual Youth and Justice Conference, she nearly said no. "I'm not a speaker," she told Mr. Keene, who had returned quietly to campus as a consultant. He raised an eyebrow. "Didn't stop you the first time. I was angry then. You still are. You've just figured out how to carry it." Imani looked at the invite again. It wasn't about fame. It was about voice, about holding the mic so others like Leo never had to fight alone. So she said yes. At the conference, she stood in a packed auditorium, palms, sweaty voice, steady. "I used to think justice came from grown-ups with titles," she told the crowd. "But sometimes, it comes from a kid who got tired of pretending not to see." She spoke not of herself, but of Leo, of his drawings, his kindness, his resilience. She described how leadership should be measured not in speeches, but in how well we protect the quietest students in the room. When she stepped down from the stage, the applause didn't thunder. It rose slowly, steadily, like something building not just for her, but for what she represented. A bridge, a reckoning, a beginning. Back home at Everdale, change was slow, but it was real. New policies, new staff, training sessions that actually involved students. An outdoor mural was commissioned, painted by students, and supervised by Leo's old art teacher. At its center was a massive tree roots stretching outward, leaves shaped like hands. Near the trunk were two small figures, a boy with headphones and a girl with wild curls holding a lantern. Underneath, in paint, only half dry, were the words, "We speak for those who weren't heard in time." Imani stood in front of the mural one afternoon, watching students pass by, some stopping, some just walking. She didn't need their praise. She only needed to know it was working. Mr. Keene joined her, sipping coffee. "You know, he said they're going to remember your name after all." Imani shook her head. "Let them remember his." He smiled. "You're learning." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves. Somewhere a student laughed. Somewhere else another probably cried. The world hadn't changed. But Everdale had begun to. And for the first time since Leo was taken away, Imani believed something she hadn't dared to before. This place could become a home. This place could become a home. Not just for Imani, not just for Leo, but for all the students who had once folded their pain into silence and tucked it beneath their uniforms, afraid of making waves in a school built to stay still. That mural, those small painted figures beneath the wide-limbed tree, wasn't just decoration. It was a promise, a reminder, and a challenge. But promises invite pressure, and not everyone keeps them. 3 weeks after the conference, the first cracks reappeared, not in the walls, but in the systems that Imani had helped build. A freshman named Mila, recently transferred from another elite school, came to Imani in tears. She'd tried to report a tutor for inappropriate behavior. The report never made it to the student council. It was referred up and then disappeared. "They said I misunderstood," Mila whispered. "That maybe I imagined it." Imani's stomach dropped. The same phrases, the same denials, wrapped in different paper, but the same rot underneath. She brought it up at the next ethics council meeting. Some members backed her. Others were hesitant. "We're already under pressure," said Marcus, a senior. "We've done good work. Let's not stretch too far." "That's what they count on," Imani snapped. "Us protecting what we built so much that we stop protecting the people it was built for." The vote to investigate was split, but passed by 1. Later that week, a suspicious email circulated anonymously, accusing Imani of pushing personal agendas and weaponizing inclusion for attention. It was written in vague, bureaucratic language, but the message was clear. Sit down. Quiet down. She didn't. Instead, she went to Mila's dorm herself. They sat on the floor, knees, touching as Mila read from a folded piece of paper she'd written during art class. It wasn't an official report. It wasn't even specific. It was just a truth, raw and afraid. "He told me I was lucky to be here," Mila read. "That girls like me should be grateful. So I smiled." But it felt like swallowing broken glass. Imani held her hand the whole time. That night, she didn't sleep. She thought about Leo, about how often people like him, like Mila, like herself, were asked to be grateful for spaces that barely tolerated them. The next morning, she met with Ms. Rivera, a new faculty liaison who had quietly supported the student council. Imani handed her Mila's letter. "I know you'll do the right thing," she said. Ms. Rivera read it, then looked up. "I'm tired too," she admitted. "But I'm not done fighting." The school agreed to a formal review. The tutor was suspended. Mila was moved into a safer program. And Imani once again found herself in the middle of a quiet storm. One afternoon, she received an envelope in her student mailbox. It was plain white, no return address. Inside, a single printed page. You're making enemies faster than you're making progress." She laughed. Out loud. In the middle of the hallway. Because it wasn't fear she felt anymore. It was power. Later that week, Leo's mother sent another package. This one included a small canvas, a painting Leo had made himself. 2 trees again. One had a scar down its trunk, but was still standing tall. The other had grown toward it, wrapping around like a hug. On the back was a note written in his mother's hand. He says, "The strong tree is you." Imani hung it above her desk. But the real shift came when a group of students, freshmen and sophomores, mostly came to her one evening in the study lounge. "Can we start something?" one asked. "Like a club. Not official. Just a place to talk. Somewhere safe." She nodded. That weekend, they met under the mural. Brought blankets. Shared cookies. Some told stories. Others just sat and listened. No attendance. No agenda. Just space. It became weekly. Then bi-weekly. Then it started spreading. Another school wrote to ask how to start their own. Imani was stunned. "We're not even organized," she told Mr. Keene. He grinned. Neither was the first heartbeat. Meanwhile, back in Boston, the university that had hosted her conference speech released a public education toolkit based on her testimony. They titled it The Lantern Sessions, inspired by the mural. She cried when she saw it, not because it meant fame, but because it meant someone somewhere had been listening. Still, the weight never fully lifted. At night, she'd lie awake thinking of the students she didn't reach, the ones still afraid, the ones who never spoke. The mural glowed in the moonlight outside her dorm window, a permanent symbol of resistance, but also of responsibility. One night she walked alone across campus, past the library, past the garden, until she found herself in the courtyard, where Leo used to line up pebbles in neat rows. She sat on the cold stone bench and just breathed. She didn't hear the footsteps until they were close. Mila sat beside her. "Still think it's becoming a home?" Mila asked softly. Imani looked at the ground. "I think it's trying." They sat in silence. Then Mila pulled something from her pocket, a hand-drawn card. On the front, a sunflower. Inside, in shaky letters, "Thank you for being noisy." Imani held it to her chest, and under the watchful branches of the painted tree, she whispered to herself a truth she rarely allowed out loud. "I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet." The words echoed in her mind, long after Mila had gone back inside, long after the night wind had stilled, and the moon slipped behind a veil of clouds. Imani sat beneath the mural until her legs were stiff and her hands were cold, but her chest was warm. There was something anchoring her now, not just anger or fear or determination, but something steadier. Legacy. And not the kind built in glass towers or donor plaques. The kind built in invisible moments. Quiet defiance. Ordinary bravery. When she returned to her dorm, there was a message waiting in her inbox. It was from the Boston Conference Director. "We'd like to nominate you for the National Youth Justice Fellowship," it read. "We believe your voice could guide others. Please consider." Imani stared at the screen, unsure whether to laugh or shut the laptop. Her first instinct was to decline. She wasn't interested in panels or interviews or stages that looked like talk shows. But this wasn't about image. It was about reach. And Leo's painting still hung above her desk, like a vow she hadn't yet fulfilled. So she said yes. Over the next month, she juggled school with fellowship work, Zoom sessions, with students in other states' workshop planning, and weekly calls with organizers from across the country. She spoke to kids who didn't have murals or councils, or even safety. Kids whose schools still punished silence and erased difference. Some told her they were scared. Some said they were angry. One girl, just 13, whispered, "I think I'm weird. They say I talk wrong." Imani told her, "You speak like yourself. That's the bravest language." And then came the unexpected. Leo wanted to visit. His mother emailed the school quietly, unsure what to expect. "He's been asking to see the mural," she wrote. He calls it the tree that grew because of a girl. Imani didn't know what to feel. She wanted to protect him, shield him from the campus that had failed him. But maybe this was healing. Not just for him. For all of them. The school arranged a weekend visit. Quiet. No press, no announcements. Just Leo, his mom, and a walk through familiar ground. Imani waited by the mural when they arrived. Leo stepped off the bus with a sketchbook clutched to his chest. He was taller now, his hair a little longer, his eyes still wide and wary. But there was a calmness in his steps she hadn't seen before. He didn't say much at first, just stood in front of the mural and stared. Then he pointed at the lantern in the girl's hand. "That's you," he said softly. "It's still on." Imani's throat tightened. "It's always on," she whispered. He gave her a drawing, two trees, holding hands with roots shaped like hearts. On the back he'd written, "We kept growing." They spent the afternoon walking the paths he remembered, stopping by his favorite bench, laughing at the chalk drawings left on the garden stones. Students passed and waved. Some stopped and said hello. Others just nodded in quiet recognition. That night, they held a small circle under the mural. No big speeches. Just a few voices: Leo's mom, Ms. Rivera, Mr. Keene. Imani didn't plan to speak, but when someone asked if she wanted to, she stepped forward. "Leo taught me what silence feels like," she said, "and what it means to be louder than fear. This isn't about what we built. It's about who we're building it for." Leo smiled. She saw it. A week later, the Everdale mural was featured in a national education article. It was titled, "The Tree That Spoke Back." Imani was mentioned by name. Leo was not, per her request. His privacy came first. But the ripple didn't stop. More schools reached out. Some asked for copies of the Lantern Sessions toolkit. Others asked Imani to speak. One even began work on their own mural. Still, the spotlight came with cost. A conservative news outlet published a slanted profile, "Teen Activist Turns Prestigious School into Political Stage." The article cherry-picked her quotes, questioned her qualifications, and called her efforts emotional manipulation disguised as advocacy. Imani read it once, then shut the laptop. That night, her inbox flooded again. Students, teachers, parents, messages of support, stories of struggle. One message simply read, "You gave us the words. We'll keep yelling." She smiled, not because she wanted to be a symbol, but because the sound was spreading. At the end of the term, the Ethics Council held a quiet vote. They elected Imani chair. She accepted on one condition, that Mila be her co-chair. "I don't know if I can," Mila said wide-eyed. "You already did," Imani replied. "Now let's show them how to make it permanent." They rewrote the bylaws, added a rotating mentorship system, opened applications for student reps from underrepresented groups. For the first time, Everdale's ethical infrastructure wasn't just decorative. It worked. And late one night, while they reviewed a stack of new proposals in the study lounge, Imani leaned back in her chair and looked around at the students gathered. This was never about her. It was about the tree, the roots, the light, and the voices growing louder beneath it. She remembered what she'd told Mila under the stars not so long ago. "I'm not done yet." Now surrounded by others who weren't done either, she whispered a new promise to herself, "I never will be."